LA wildfires have devastated thousands of homeowners. The estimates are that these climate-induced fires will result in insurance companies suffering losses of around $30 billion, and that's amid many homeowners not being insured. Now, what can South Africa learn from this? Langa Sigodi, account executive for corporate and global markets at Maksure Risk Solutions, joins us with a greater perspective. Thank you so much for your time, Langa. Now, I do understand even before these fires, there were a number of insurance companies that actually were just refusing to cover homeowners for wildfires. How do we get to a point where homes are uninsurable?
I think insurance is a risk game, and I think we need to be very conscious of that at all the times. And there came a point in LA in particular where fires were predictable. Like these fires that we've had right now were very devastating in magnitude, but the frequency in which fires have been occurring in LA meant that they were somewhat predictable to that extent. And you can't insure against things that are predictable. This is the basic concept that led to this situation. Again, if you want to just have another look at it a little bit closer to home, we've had devastating floods, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. You look at, throughout Durban, etc., but in most high profile, the April floods of 2022. What we found there in the South African insurance market as well is that either deductibles are rising to very, very high levels for companies, or there's no flood cover at all. So these sorts of trends are the types of things that we see when things become predictable, losses become predictable.
But because at this point, we know that this is climate induced. It is of no fault of the consumer.
Sure.
So then is there no space for regulatory authorities to play a role there? What are the alternatives?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So if you look again at the case study of the United States and California, they're trying to legislate that insurers must provide homeowners insurance. The problem with that is that when it comes to the South African, in particular, insurance industry, most of our insurers are not South African companies. So what you then have is a situation where capital can leave. We've had a lot of companies that have left the South African insurance market over the last 10 years or so for reasons unrelated to climate change, but it may have factored into their thinking. So it's the type of thing of, okay, if you want to force people to insure them, then they might leave. So it's a catch-22 for any government sort of institution.
But then, obviously, we're talking about a very big factor here, which is climate change. You mentioned also the floods in KZN. We've also had incidences in the Western Cape wildfires there as well in Knysna. What role then does climate change then play in the landscape of insurance? Do we need to have a new normal?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that we can think of, and when we look at case studies around the world about what companies and societies are doing. I think the first thing is that we need to start looking at our construction and the way that we do construction. There's a pretty viral case now, that popular case of this house with, I think, $9 million within LA that survived. Somewhat miraculously, but that is, when you look down to the finer details, it was because of they sort of future-proofed their house against certain catastrophes. So what we may find is that when you do have a disaster, and we should never lose sight that these things are absolutely traumatic for the people involved, that when there is a disaster, the reconstruction of that property may need to have a more forward-looking view. So again, I'm just thinking out the box here. But if you're in KwaZulu-Natal, let's try build away from floodplains and that sort of thing. That sort of dynamic thinking is what's going to help us, because the climate change itself is somewhat inevitable. It's only how we control our response as society and the private sector, being the insurance companies, to those catastrophes.
What does then this mean for me as a homeowner? Because in LA, a lot of people are uninsured now. The burden of the cost rests on them as well. Could there also be a gap where insurance companies could come in and say, okay, I will insure you, but now the price is going to go up 80%? Could there be then an kind of extortion-based dynamic there?
I would hope it's not extortion, but I understand your point 100%. I do think the inevitable conclusion when you have catastrophic losses like this is that we must remember that within the insurance sort of ecosystem, we have what we call reinsurers. So this is the insurance that insurance companies take. And they will have been very exposed to catastrophes all around the world, not just the United States, but we've had incidents in Belgium, for instance, in the recent past. So what invariably happens is that when reinsurers increase their rates, insurance companies may pass that on. You asked about legislation a little bit earlier on. Perhaps we could look at ways in which we legislate against that transfer, you know, from reinsurers who pass it on to insurers and ultimately to the consumers. But you will find the tightening of pricing, because the tension here is that you've got, again, private capital, the insurance companies who do want to return a profit and do want to make successful, sustainable businesses. But we've got societies, everyone and the public good. And I guess there is a role here perhaps for the state to say, okay, how do we bridge this gap so that we create insurable societies, because insurable societies are robust societies.
Yeah. All right. Well, Langa, thank you so much for those insights. We do have to wrap the conversation there. That was Langa Sigodi, account executive at Maksure Risk Solutions.